Thank you, Bill, for that very kind introduction. It's a great man I think the world of, and it means a lot to me that you came to Grand Rapids for this. And I want to thank Elaine and Joe and Kristen and Claire and the staff of both the Gerald Ford Presidential Museum as well as the Foundation for your hospitality and the kindness that you've shown. It's great to be here. And particularly to be here at this museum because of the person that it's named for. Gerald Ford did much to heal this nation. And I really believe America sure could use another Gerald Ford today. And it's, and Grand Rapids is a special place. They had me this morning go to the West Michigan Aviation Academy. I was so impressed and stunned with these young people, the questions they asked, and let me tell you, I'm one who believes that education is a national security issue. I think it was Ronald Reagan who said that freedom is just one generation away from extinction. And if we get more young people like what I saw today here in Grand Rapids, I feel pretty good about the future of this country. And I was talking with Lane and Joe beforehand. It means a lot to me because 40 years ago in 1976, when President Ford was running for election, I was 16 years old, and I had a 1970 Le Mans Pontiac, and that was the Gerald Ford 1976 campaign car in South Carolina. We had bumper stickers all over it, his picture, you name it, and we even had a speaker rigged up under the hood so you could hear the Ford campaign song going and a couple of his great lines like, it's not enough for anyone to say, trust me, trust must be earned, all the great Ford stuff. That was 40 years ago. So as my wife was taking me to the airport yesterday, I could remember the old Ford campaign song in my mind. It was coming back. And because my wife has seen some pictures of that, and she said, let me tell you something. If I knew you back then, I would not have dated you. But, but it's a pleasure to be here. You know, one of the things when you're talking about this topic and keeping America safe, and you're talking about national security, you're talking about terrorism, you can never take anything for granted. The story is told of Thomas E. Dewey, who back in 1948 was favored in all of the polls to defeat then President Harry Truman. On election day, he gave his wife a blank check and said, honey, I want you to go out today and buy the most expensive lingerie that money can buy, because tonight you are going to bed with the President of the United States. Well, she did. And you know what happened. The polls closed. The early returns came in. It didn't look good for Tom Dewey, and it only got worse. Well, by about midnight, Tom Dewey realized he had lost the presidency that he was supposed to win. So he goes on upstairs to his hotel suite at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. And there in bed with all her new, beautiful lingerie on, just staring at him, was his wife. Well, Tom, she said, is Harry coming over here or am I going over there? You can't take anything for granted. Don't expect the expected, particularly when you're dealing with this issue. The Commander-in-Chief and the U.S. Constitution, this is what it's all about. We've got an election next Tuesday. The Constitution, you know, I think it's important, and I talked about this to the students today. Why do we have a federal government? Why did the states come together? One reason, to provide for the common defense of the American people. That's in the preamble to our Constitution. That's why we have a federal government. Everything else is secondary. And our Constitution specifically provides that the President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and the Navy of the United States and of the militia, i.e. the National Guard of the several states, when it is called into actual service of the United States. And the Constitution also says that the Congress shall raise the armies and provide and maintain for a Navy. It's important to understand that, because keeping our people safe is why the states came together and why we have a federal government. And that, to me, is what this election next week is really all about. Today, we live in a more dangerous world than we did after 9/11. I asked the students today if they knew what Moore's Law was. Of course, Moore's law says that the number of transistors on integrated circuits doubles every 2 years. That was Gordon Moore, who was a co-founder of Intel. He said that back in 1965. Well, it's only gotten worse. Technology is changing so quickly today, and this is why I say it's a more dangerous world today. Technology is changing so quickly, but our government and the governments of our allies is so stovepiped, and they lack the ability to adapt and move and make decisions in a hurry. So I say, as the technologies increase, because of the fact we're so stovepiped, the threats are increasing exponentially. I mean, look at it. Foreign governments are conducting cyber attacks against our government, against our businesses. People are crossing borders who we don't even know. Radical Islamists are using social media to recruit. Now we've got radical Islam on American soil, San Bernardino, Chattanooga, Boston. You can go on and on, Orlando. The 9/11 Commission, I think, said it best. That 9/11, above all else, was a failure of imagination. We're always trying to respond to that last terrorist attack rather than thinking outside the box to prevent the next one. And that's what we've got to do. The fight against radical Islam, I have been saying this for some time, it is the challenge of our time. I think it's important when we look at this, some people, when we begin to look at terrorism and all, I think it's important that we understand the history of this, what this is really about. And of course, you've got the two branches of Islam. You've got the Sunnis and you've got the Shiites. And they've been fighting each other going back for 1,400 years, back to the death of Muhammad. And they had the famous Battle of Karbala in 680 AD. And it goes back to that. And then the Islamic scholars, going back to the 1500s, they have been, what you're seeing today, they've been wanting to do for a long time. And convert everyone else. If you do convert, you live as second-class citizens, called dhimmitud. And if you don't convert, they kill you. And that's what's driving this. But within the branches of Islam, the Sunni and the Shiites, they have three different kinds of Muslims. You have the moderates, you have those who are reformed, and then you have the jihadists, the Islamists. So you've got Islamists in both the Shiite branch as well as the Sunni branch of Islam. One of the things that I have said for some time is that political correctness is literally killing us in this country. Remember Nadal Malik Hassan, the Fort Hood terrorist, the Army major? The FBI had intercepted 18 emails between him and Anwar al-Awlaki, who went on to head al-Qaeda in Yemen. But we did nothing. We did nothing. We've got to condemn political correctness. One of the things that I have called for too, in some of the mosques, think about that mosque outside of Washington, D.C. We had so many of the 9/11 hijackers went there. The imam was Anwar al-Awlaki, people who were tied in with some of the leadership in Boston, where the terrorists and during the Boston Marathon, where they went, all right there. What if just some one person had come forward with some actionable intelligence? We would have been able to save some lives. So I've called for even a rewards program, if you will. If you see something going on, to report it, almost a rewards program in these mosques to get good people to come forward. And we do need to work more, I think, with Reform Muslims. A friend of mine is Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. You may have seen him on TV. He's a Sunni Muslim, and he runs an outfit, the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. He served in the United States Navy. And he has led a movement to condemn what we call political Islam. And he loves his country and is the kind of reform Muslim that we need to be working with more, I think. Then we've got something I have also advocated for is called Al-Hurra. Al-Hurra is a network that our State Department has that's had a profound impact on getting a pro-Western values, pro-Western ideals message to the young people in some of these countries. And the more we can do that, that's how we're going to win the minds of these young people who the Islamists and the jihadists are trying to recruit in these countries and through their social media and other efforts. King Abdullah of Jordan. is the real deal. That's the kind of person in the Islamic world we need to be working with. I first got to know him 20 years ago when he commanded the Jordanian Special Forces. And I got an invitation to go to Amman and to meet Abdullah. At that time, he was not the king. King Hussein, his father, was still the king. He wasn't even the crown prince. And it showed the brilliance of King Hussein. King Hussein knew 3 days before he died, he named Abdullah to be the crown prince because he knew he was the one person who could hold it together in that part of the world. His wife was a Palestinian, and he had commanded the special forces. So he had the support of the military there. So I'm waiting to see then Prince Abdullah. And I'm in the waiting room, and they've got a family tree that all up and down the wall. And it starts with the Prophet Muhammad, and it comes all the way down. And you see King Hussein right there. But then there's another line of Muhammad's where like Muhammad's daughter is marrying a cousin or whatever, and I made the comment that in the palace I said, well, it looks like this other line has more of the Prophet Muhammad's blood in it than King Hussein's line. And Abdullah's aide looked at me and said, you mustn't say these things in the palace. So I took that cue. But the reason I tell you that, here is a moderate or reform Muslim. He has been educated in the West. He came to our Congress last year complaining that our State Department wasn't giving him everything that he needs to fight ISIS and to fight radical Islam. We need to be giving King Abdullah and people like that everything that they need and then some. And I think he summed it up best. He said that what we're dealing with now with radical Islam, it's a war within Islam, but he called it World War III. And I think he's right. I talked about the recruitment efforts. We know what the bad guys are doing on social media to recruit young people and others to these jihadist efforts. A friend of mine had a friend whose daughter was hiding in the bushes in Norway during the attack. Remember Anders Breivik, who killed those 68 kids on that island in Norway? And they were hiding in the bushes, and their daughter had her iPhone. And she's hiding in the bushes, and Anders Breivik was so close to her that she could hear him breathing. And she took out her iPhone, and she went on Twitter. And she sent out a tweet to the local people what was going on. And the local people were able to come and rescue the rest of those kids before law enforcement got there. That showed me the power of social media. And I began to think, how can we harness that for us to do good and to counter terrorism? And also looked at, remember the Mumbai attacks in India? It was Flickr, the photo sharing site, where we got some of the best information what was going on. And during the Boston bombings, we got the best information when the police were putting stuff on Twitter and Facebook. So how do we harness it? I came up with the idea of a situational awareness hotline. So if you see something, and we've written articles about it, we've done some shows on Fox and Newsmax and Fox, a couple of articles. If you see something suspicious on Facebook or Twitter, or if you see something down the street in your neighborhood, you could text a photo in real time of that suspicious activity or of stuff you see on Facebook or Twitter that you know, or other social media that you know is not right, to our National Counterterrorism Center, where we currently have a database of over 1 million known or suspected terrorists. We could in real time match that up. You know, the government always says, be vigilant, be vigilant. What does that mean? If we had a situational awareness hotline, you could be more than vigilant, you could be actively involved. And I believe it's an idea whose time has come. And in fact, you could tie it in, I've talked to people at the state level, to the emergency management directors of the states to help with first responders. So we could actually maybe help prevent a terrorist attack, or definitely during a terrorist attack, we could improve situational awareness. Border security. I know border security has been a big topic in this election. And I will say this, securing the United States border with Mexico is one of the most important and significant national security issues of our time. The previous FBI Director, Robert Mueller, testified back in 2012, I think it was, that in 2011, There were 59,000 people from countries other than Mexico who were caught illegally trying to come into this country. That included Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Sudan. Let me tell you, they were not coming here as part of a church mission outreach program to America. They were coming here to do harm. Well, where are the ones we didn't catch? Where are they today? The FBI tells us that we've got open files of people with potential ties to ISIS in all 50 states in this country. We've got over 1,000 open files in 50 states now total. And you always, if you ever notice the news every year or two, there's always a European cartoonist who's drawing a picture of Muhammad and some imam is putting out a fatwa on that person and trying to kill him. It started with a Danish cartoonist named Kurt Westergaard. And there was an imam, Saeed Jaziri, who put out an order to kill this guy. And he was banned from entry into France, banned from entry into Canada. We caught him a couple years ago. You know where we caught him? In the back of a trunk of a BMW trying to cross the Mexican border into the United States. They know how to get here. That's why securing the border is so important. But you know what? We've got a law in the books that would do that. It's called the 2006 Secure Fence Act. It's the law of the land to secure our southern border. And they built a little bit of it along the San Diego, Tijuana portion of the border. Guess what? It worked. It cut down murders, drug crime, drugs, you name it, by like 90%. So much that the Customs and Border Patrol people, when they would catch someone in Texas or New Mexico, they would take them over there to release them. But unfortunately, both Republicans and Democrats alike failed us because we have not enforced that law, and we have not funded it. It's time to fund and enforce the 2006 Secure Fence Act. Port and harbor security is something I'm very concerned about, and we've looked at this a lot. And I got to tell you, I was surprised. Remember, with radical Islamic terrorism, it's so much about inflicting economic damage on the Western world. You shut down one port or one harbor, think about the damage that you've done. We don't have any mine countermeasure. Our military has no mine countermeasure capability on the Atlantic or in the Gulf. We need that kind of capability. We also need to take autonomous underwater vehicles, if you will, and do the periodic surveys of the seabeds of our ports and harbors. We got to think outside the box to prevent the next attack. Missile defense. This is so important for this country, and it affects us in so many ways. The guy who really came up with the idea was Edward Teller, the famous Nobel laureate involved with the Manhattan Project. And when Ronald Reagan was governor of California, he was the Lawrence Livermore National Lab Director. And he sold Reagan on the idea of having a strategic missile defense shield for this country. And problem was, Reagan got to be president, and he could not get past, the budget director and others who thought it would cost too much money. The Secretary of Energy at the time was a mentor of mine named Jim Edwards, and I had the privilege of interviewing Dr. Edwards before he passed away for my book. And I noticed a picture hanging up, and it was Edward Teller. And I knew what he looked like because I had seen a special on him on the History Channel. I said, that's Dr. Teller. And he began to tell me the story. And Teller complained to him. He said, I know Reagan wants it, but I can't get to him. They're blocking me. Long story short, Edwards took out of the safe, and we keep our government has in the safe, Department of Energy, the original letter that Albert Einstein wrote to Franklin Roosevelt proposing the Manhattan Project. He said, Dr. Teller, I want you to write a letter to President Reagan proposing a strategic defense initiative for America. He took both letters of Dr. Teller and around the palace guards, if you will, got to Reagan and said, this can be your Manhattan Project. And the rest is history. So I call Dr. Edwards the unsung hero of missile defense. And we've got missile defense on the West Coast. Fort Greely, Alaska, Vandenberg Air Force Base, and it's very important because of the North Korean threat. What we do not have, and I'm a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army, but I didn't realize this. We have no land-based missile defense capability on the entire East Coast of the United States. We've got to have that. And I would go a step further to at least give us some kind of a gap filler, a gap measure, until we get a land-based missile defense. We've got these Aegis ballistic missile defense systems on ships, but they can only deal with the shorter range missiles. We need to configure them to handle the intercontinental ballistic missiles. Right now, Iran doesn't have the range to reach us there, but we are vulnerable to a ship or a submarine launched attack on our east coast. We need that. And speaking of North Korea and Iran, here's the big, I have said you can't look at one without looking at the other. And this is why I think that the Iran deal was such a bad deal. The Federation of American Scientists tell us, going back to 1983-84, Iran has been financing the missile development efforts of North Korea, so they can, with cash and oil, so they can get that technology. When you look at the missile, and we know every few months it's almost as if Kim Jong-un is firing off another missile to get attention. That missile is called the Type-A-Dome missile. Well, the missile that Iran has is called the Shahab missile. When we put them together side by side, guess what we see? The same missile. It is the same missile, same old parts from China, same technology. It is the link is so real between these two. And the North Korean threat, they've got a rocket called the Untitled rocket. I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, they were able to get a satellite using this rocket up in orbit. And that's based on that ballistic missile technology, that Type-A-Dome missile. That rocket has a range of 6,200 miles, we believe. The distance between the capital of North Korea and Los Angeles is 5,950 miles. This is something we've got to take very seriously. And missile defense is, again, it gets back to missile defense. It plays a big role in it. Electromagnetic pulse threat. That is a very real threat. People ask me, what is that? Is there anything to that? Let me tell you, there are two types, and basically you're talking two types of electromagnetic pulse threats to the country. Each one does the same thing. It takes down our grid. It fries our grid. One is where you have a high altitude nuclear detonation that would basically fry the grid. The people are fine. We don't have the radiation damage, but it fries the grid. The second is something called a Carrington event, the geomagnetic storm on the face of the sun. The last time we had one of those was 1859. But you know what? And we survived. But in 1859, the American farmer could grow enough food to feed the American people without electricity. You can't do that today. This is a very serious problem facing us. And NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory tells us that it is inevitable in the next 10 to 100 years, we're going to have another Carrington event. We've got a law right now. It's called the Critical Infrastructure Protection Act. And certain members of Congress, they used to call it the SHIELD Act, to harden our grid. This thing has been lingering in Congress for years. We need that legislation passed. We need to harden our grid, and we need smaller energy transformer technology. And what I mean by that is this. If the grid goes down, the transformers we have had are so big, and it's a logistical nightmare to get these things where they need to be to get our grid back up and running. But it is a real problem. Open source intelligence is something I've been a big advocate of for a long time. And open source intelligence means what it is. It could be the internet, newspapers, TV. The problem is there's so much information out there, and it's getting more and more. How do you find what you need? Google doesn't give you everything that's out there. It only gives you the most popular searches. I was actually the first person in the United States to reveal in 2012 that the Iranians were on the ground in North Korea helping them with their missile test. And we revealed that in October of that year, an agreement had been entered into on science and technology between Iran and North Korea. How did I do that? It went on with Bill Hemmer on Fox, and a few days later, it pretty much common knowledge. How did I do that? I went overseas to a university that had a search engine that does deeper dives, all open source, and we asked them to do a search in Farsi, not English, but Farsi. And guess what we found? Pictures in local Iranian newspapers of them on the ground in North Korea, helping them with their ballistic missile tests. Our government needs to make better use of open source intelligence. We need to make better use of more sophisticated search engines to help us keep this country safe and to deal with terrorism. General Sam Wilson, the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, said that 90% of intelligence comes from open sources. The other 10%, the more clandestine, is just more dramatic. And he said this, and I quote, "The real hero is Sherlock Holmes, not James Bond." We need more Sherlock Holmes to get the stuff that's staring us in the face. Cybersecurity. This is the most complex national security issue this country has ever faced, and it is the one that we as a nation are the most unprepared for. I say we have 5 dimensions of warfare: air, land, sea, and space, and now cyber. It's important the countermeasures, when we look for countermeasures, that we distinguish between the types of attacks we're looking at. The Islamists are more about sabotage. They're trying to take down our systems, be they financial systems or whatever. The Chinese are about espionage. They're trying to steal stuff. They're trying to steal our intellectual property, and they have inflicted grave harm on American businesses. Each requires different countermeasures. And there's a lot that we can do, and in my book we give a number of ideas, but probably the biggest thing where we really can make a difference is this. James Gosler, who was a top expert for the National Security Agency and CIA, said that we need about 30,000 real cybersecurity experts in America to thwart the worst kind of attack on this country. You know how many we got? About 1,000. We need a massive recruitment effort, and one of the things that I have called for is the establishment of national security scholarships on our college campuses and universities. Let's recruit our own people. Let's recruit our own kids to go into data security and computer science and cyber security. We need to have that kind of recruitment effort, and they can be given back to this country and can help them with their college. We need these national security scholarships. NATO. Very interesting, a lot going on there. It's interesting, of course, 28 members, and Article 5, of course, basically says an attack on one is an attack on all. But one thing that gets lost in this is what the countries contribute. There's in the guideline, official NATO guidelines, it states that all members should spend at least 2% of their gross domestic product on defense. Of the 28 nations who are members today, only the United States, Greece, Poland, Estonia, and the United Kingdom do that. We need to have NATO, I call it a 21st century NATO, a NATO that focuses more on terrorism there. And we're beginning to see that. The new Supreme Allied Commander, our new top general there, is a great guy, General Scaparrotti. I knew him years ago when he was a 1-star. He commanded he was our Joint Forces Commander in Korea. And I think you're going to see us hopefully moving in the right direction under his leadership. But we have to have a NATO that adapts to the 21st century. One of the things they are doing, I think it's good, countries like Estonia, who've had experience dealing with the Russians on their cyber attacks years ago into their banking systems, we put a NATO cyber center of excellence to learn from them and get those lessons learned. And very quickly, Turkey, again, I said we need a NATO that is a 21st century NATO. We've got 50 nuclear bombs sitting in Turkey based on a Cold War threat. Incirlik Air Base, when they had that failed coup attempt, and go back and look at Erdogan. He's a bad news character. He was one of the ringleaders of an Islamist party that was outlawed back in the 1990s by the Turkish Supreme Court, and then he came back. And when that failed coup attempt occurred, they would not let our own people get on and off that base. They shut down power on that base. There's no reason to have those nuclear bombs there. Nuclear weapons our nuclear weapons off of the United States soil should be only in those countries that are safe, reliable, and regimes that we can count on, 100%. That's what I'm talking about when I say a 21st century NATO. China, good Lord, where do you even start? I mean, I call them the great enabler, of North Korea with what they're doing. Look what happened last couple of weeks with the shenanigans in the South China Sea, where they say the whole South China Sea belongs to us. And what's driving it is the oil and the natural gas that's there. And we got to understand the South China Sea is a national security issue. $5 trillion in goods and cargo and for the world's economy go through the South China Sea every year. What's driving a lot of this is China's having a lot of problems at home. They're spending more on internal security, domestic security, than external security. And their external security has increased. What's happening? Back in the 70s, the average woman in China gave birth to 4.8 kids. Today it's down to 1.8 kids. When they instituted that one child per family policy, but you got to have about 2.1 to sustain a population. They're not doing that. So what's happening is that population gets older in China. They have fewer and fewer young people to support them in terms of health care and things like that. So that's what's driving a lot of this. Aviation security, one of the things I have advocated is the need to have laser jammers on aircraft to deal with the threat that is a very potential threat with the literally thousands of these man-portable air defense systems that we can't account for. Roughly 1 million of these things were made since 1967. Most are in the hands of governments, but there are thousands that they cannot account for today. Biological threat is a very real threat. I would say after cyber, the biological threat is probably the greatest threat facing the country. And that's because of the fact that it's much easier now to create these biological pathogens. And it's also, you've got the incubation period, meaning the symptoms may not show up until 20 days, and yet you've been able to go around. I mean, so the jihadists could use this as almost like a suicide bomber situation, but from a bio threat. President Bush had a great program known as the Transformational Medical Technology Initiative to speed up this process from the time we discover a bad biological agent until the time we've got a therapeutic. It takes years. How do we speed that up with better vaccine discovery and drug delivery systems and things like that? We're not doing that anymore. We need to bring that back. Another thing we need to do, since the 1970s, we had what was called an aeromedical isolation team. These were our top virologists. They belonged to the Army's Infectious Disease Institute. When something happened bad, Ebola, another hemorrhagic fever, whatever, in 24 hours, our team could be there on the ground and quarantine people and do things. It's called the Aeromedical Isolation Team. It was canceled by the Pentagon in 2010. We need to bring that back. Whoever our next president is needs to bring that back. And then we've got something called the Biological Advanced Research Development Agency. Those are the civilians. They make great things to deal with bioagents, but they need to work more closely with the military, because from a training and logistics standpoint, the military is all about saving lives today. It's not going to do us any good if we got all these great therapeutics for a bio-attack on this country sitting locked up in a warehouse somewhere, and we don't know how to deploy them and get them out to the American people. Energy is a national security issue, and it was great to look at some of the exhibits here in the museum, some of the things President Ford did on this issue. The U.S. Energy Information Administration says that between now and 2040, 85% of the global energy demand will come from developing countries, and global energy consumption will increase 56%. Point being, we need 100% American energy and then some, not just for our people, but for the developing nations. Because if they don't buy the energy from us, they're going to buy them from the bad guys. And we know for a fact that a great deal of their energy profits go to finance terrorism. We have got to be 100% energy independent, and then some. Energy is a national security issue. Rebuilding the military, our next president is going to have the hands full. Our Army's been cut to pre-World War II levels. Our Navy is its smallest since World War I, and we have the smallest and oldest Air Force in our nation's history. We used to say that we had this strategy called a 2MRC strategy, military regional conflict, meaning that the United States policy was we could fight on one front and win, and fight on the other front and win at the same time. Well, as we began to cut and cut and cut, They realized we couldn't do that. So they called it a win, hold, win strategy, meaning we would fight here, we would try to hang on here, win here, and deploy forces here to win. Well, as they began to cut more and more, they realized, well, we probably can't do that either. And now there are many who wonder, can we win one military regional conflict? We have cut our military to the bone. Victory without bankruptcy. People say, well, Van, a lot of these ideas and things that you got to keep the country safe going to cost us a lot of money. In 1960, when I was born, national security spending was 52% of the federal budget. Today it's down to 16%. It's not the national security spending that's bankrupting this country, it's everything else. But there are things that we can do to be more efficient. From a contracting standpoint, the way we field new technologies, making better use of our National Guard, where we can train and equip roughly 3 or 4 for every 1 active duty soldier, but we got to make sure they're adequately equipped. A lot of things we can do, but the bottom line is, it's not the military that's bankrupting the country. For example, the unmanned aerial vehicle project came out of the Pentagon. I know the folks in the office who did that years ago, but they got the buy-in from the customer at the outset on the research, and they were able to maximize it, and we had a customer. The reason I tell you this, it's a great model to use for research and development on new systems. But we've got to change contracting. We had, the Government Accountability Office did a study between 2001 and 2008. 2001 and 2008, we had $300 billion in cost overruns of some of our biggest systems. And because the way that they're structured, the people, oh, I want this, I want this. We can have a contracting system where they are encouraged to finish on time, ahead of time, and under budget. Those are the kinds of things that we need to be doing. Edward Gibbons wrote in his epitaph on ancient Athens, in the end, more than they wanted freedom, they wanted security. They wanted a comfortable life. And they lost it all. Security, comfort, and freedom. When the Athenians finally determined not to give to society, but for society to give to them. When the freedom they wished for most was freedom from responsibility, then Athens ceased to be free. Will history one day say the same for us? After 9/11, this country came together in a bipartisan manner and resolved to do whatever it took to keep America safe. We need that same resolve today. President Ford said it best. The Constitution is the bedrock of all our freedoms. Guard and cherish it. Keep honor and order in your own house, and the republic will endure. Whoever we elect as our new president next Tuesday will inherit the most complex national security and foreign policy situation a United States president has ever faced. And he or she must lead. Thank you very much for having me tonight.